Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
What an interview we had last week, folks. And if you haven't had an opportunity to listen to our episode 20, if this is your first time, if you've started listening with us in episode 21 here, I would recommend, normally you wouldn't, I think Jason and I both would recommend, stop now, go back and listen to episode 20.
Yeah, without question.
We had Jeff Ashworth on, who has written the original one, which was the Game Master's Book of Random Encounters. He just released, at the time that we've recorded, within the past week or two, the Game Master's Book of Non-Player Characters,
which is arriving to my house in 2 days.
Okay, there we go. At the end of the last episode, you said that might occur.
It did occur.
Yep. And then he even talked about the future books that he has that they're planning and looking at having come out.
Yeah, I had wanted to ask him about that, Brad, and I thought, I don't want to overstay our welcome, if you will. He was so giving with this time. Like we had said, I think in the wrap up in the GM corner last week, we had been talking beforehand. We kept going for like another half an hour off air, and he started getting really into the weeds and just fascinating stuff. But my vibe was that there might be more than the third book in May coming out, like planned. I don't know.
I think I did. And Jeff, if you happen to be listening, you did a good job of keeping your cards close to your vest. But I suspect, and I would hope.
Yeah, honestly,
exactly. Even if there isn't, I think, obviously it's subject to sales and publisher decision.
Right.
But I would think this type of material in the context, again, listen to the episode 20. You can look up Jeff Ashworth on Amazon.
Yep.
And you will see the two books. They are published by Media Lab Books.
And the third one available for pre-order.
Yep. Out in May, or he said it's scheduled for May.
Yep. So
one of the things that you and I talked about this before we hit the record button, and you actually messaged it as a topic, and it was funny you mentioned it because it was something that was on my mind, and that was this idea of and I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the interview myself because I cannot remember what Jeff used as the term, but I've always used the term DM prerogative.
Right.
Where it's the DM's choice to bend the rules or add some sauce or spice to the game.
Right.
Or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
What I found interesting, so he used, and I'm going to paraphrase the analogy, was, DM can, or D&D can sometimes be a very binary game,
Right. The mechanic of it, right.
Yeah, the mechanic. You roll to hit armor class and you hit them or you don't.
Yep.
And then again, very, very terrible paraphrase, but this idea, so let's say it's a ranged attack and you shoot the arrow and you hit the person. DM prerogative now. Do I as a DM say, okay, the arrow went through
right
the attacker, the attackee,
and
hit someone behind them or something like that? Do I have or want to use the power as the game master, dungeon master to do it?
Yeah, and that was Jeff's example, right?
Yeah, I don't know if you've thought about that from like a Star Wars perspective, or
I mean, I think like you and I were talking off air right before we started recording, Brad, that GM prerogative, let's define that for everybody. GM prerogative, the power of the GM to flex the rules for the sake of gameplay or narrative. Okay. It's always there, but I think like we were talking right beforehand of how the need for it seems to be a little different depending on the mechanic. Like you just asked about Star Wars. Well, you and I really like clearly the narrative dice system that FFG put out. Now that Edge Studios is going to continue, I'll save that for the GM corner. But so that with the narrative system, it's built in. right? That's one of the things that attracted me. And you and I was going to say, you and I are both very binary guys. And I can almost feel both of our wives, wherever they are, nodding somewhere vigorously. But what I mean to say is you and I are very numerically, empirically driven guys.
Mhm.
And so it was a little counterintuitive to me, certainly for myself, that I became so taken by the narrative system. And in full disclosure, I really only made peace with that after I looked up the really neat resources out there on Reddit and some of the other threads where there are analytic breakdowns. In fact, I think you sent me one of the first ones actually a few years ago, right? They're analytic breakdowns of probability. There are probability tables for the narrative system where you can see through the fourth wall of how this system was created. And then it's like, oh, so I see. So the green dice are probabilistically tuned toward greater success, but the purple dice are probabilistically tuned toward more likely complications. And it's like, okay, that's just clever. But that's built into the system. And to be quite honest, I think it makes it much more difficult on the GM to adjudicate well. But then like you said, and then I'll stop with the D20s or the Warhammer D10 or whatever. Yeah, if you've got AC, how do you make that narratively interesting without breaking the system? Right, because you're the PCs still, the PCs, the players still need to be able to know that they can predict you're going to be honest. Like when you GM for me in our D&D game, it's like there were early sessions where I just said to you, you totally dumbed down those NPCs, and you're like, yeah, right, because I was a level 1 and you being new to GMing the game didn't realize how powerful, didn't realize the CR of the situation. And I had my posterior kicked almost immediately.
Yeah, but one, we also had miscalculated your hit points. So
there is that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
there was that.
You were egregiously low.
10 hit points was not a great start.
No. And then when you had a level 1 character and I didn't look it up and I had CR12 monsters, right. 3 of them, I'm right. Like, okay, I'm going to have to play this out a little bit. And this is what we started to talk about. And then we're like, okay, we need to stop and hit the record button. Yeah, and that is, I have used as a new DM prerogative, creativity, bend but not break the rules. I have found that I was doing this much more broadly. I was using DM prerogative much more broadly earlier in the game versus earlier in my gaming story as a DM versus now, because I was using it to hide a lack of understanding of the rules. And because, in our own ways, you more so structured than I, before we're going to do something, we want to understand it. And I think that goes for anyone, but for us, there's an analytical component to it, much like you weren't comfortable with, or you would play it, but it was a little bit of a discomfort until you realize the analytics behind the dice.
Yeah,
for the narrative system. For me, using air quote DM prerogative to account for a lack of knowledge or understanding because I rushed into this.
Yeah.
Did make me a little uncomfortable, but because we still had fun and we were laughing during it, and it was humorous. There were some other humorous things in the context of gaming. You'll always hear me refer to Jason and his axe throwing skills.
They were epic.
Yeah, he had a set of throwing axes, and they just dice rolls were always horrendous.
Always awful.
Always. I mean, I didn't need DM prerogative to make those out. No. I just used humor. But I used it as a crutch, and I'm starting to see how I'm using it more creatively now.
To kind of make our point, to keep us moving forward here. So I've been thinking about this for a bit. I have in front of me the Pathfinder first edition Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide, and this was one of the earlier GM guides I read. I mean, again, with the great push for Pathfinder, courtesy of Brad a few years ago. But
I think that was the second. You were really going to be good with the DM guide and the player's handbook for Pathfinder,
right?
And you really hadn't read, if I remember correctly, any really DMing guides prior to this, other than the Star Wars.
Other than Star Wars D6, that's exactly right. And so this really opened my eyes. And I've been thinking about this for this episode. And I want to read just this really short paragraph, because this stuck with me. Because Pathfinder, as we all know, Pathfinder is a very crunchy system. So it's a very crunchy system. It's very binary, if you will, right? It's a perfect
first edition, especially.
Thanks. You're right. They softened that, definitely second edition. But this is on one of the first pages. So this stuck with me ever since I read this. And I think it's exactly what you and I are talking about, Brad. Page 8 in the first edition Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide. And as I read a bit, brother, as I quote, weaving plots involving the player characters and any number of non-player characters, leading dialogue, and unfurling a vast tapestry of ideas, stories, and adventure. The game master is a storyteller first and foremost. While the game is a collaborative narrative told from all sides of the table, the game master paves and maintains the road along which adventurers walk. And I mean, kudos to Paizo, because I really think the writing in I think I said this a long time ago in one of the episodes. I think the writing in Pathfinder is simply some of the strongest out there in the RPG world. But I think if the creators of Pathfinder, of roll 37 saving throws to see if you make it through the next 6 seconds, if they start out their advanced training, if you will, saying, look, first and foremost, you're a storyteller and everything bows to that. I think that helps us to answer your question of what do you do with these binary games?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. And that's where, at first I thought I did in many ways overjump by stepping us into a very crunchy system like that. We've talked about the context before. If not, it'll come up again. D&D allowed me to, in my own head, this is not a judgment on a game, just in my own head, it allowed me a little more creativity to account for a lack of knowledge. It was harder to do that in Pathfinder because of the structure of it versus a little more free flow freedom within, in my perception, for D&D. So, and I had to account for it. Jeff said in the last episode something to the effect of and again, I'm not going to quote this correctly. The player characters, if they're playing well and if you've set them up properly, will give the DM all the content they need. If you set them up properly.
Right. Not that we don't need to prep, as he said, but that we can feed from them because they know where they want to go.
Yeah. And I found that the case because when we first started playing, first couple episodes of D&D, I'd written a lot of backstory. It was fun to do. That exercise was fun to do, to just build the initial world, the world building, which we just recently finished discussing. But then get into the game and you start asking questions or making decisions that I hadn't necessarily accounted for. And so I would have to make adjustments, and I'm new to this.
Yep.
And so DM Prerogative was used a little bit heavily, except for throwing axes. You did that all on your own. But as you mature as a game master, so like I said, I'm going to leave that alone now. I used it a lot when I was new.
Yeah.
I'm still new, but I'm starting to mature as a game master DM. So where does it fit? So in your
Yeah,
context,
right.
you've been further along with this with Star Wars, so
Yeah.
you've been gaming Star Wars a little bit longer. So you have been able to the GM more and kind of start to refine.
Yeah.
How did you handle that?
I don't know if I have. I think I am. I think I'm still learning. As I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, okay, and especially trying to make this more concrete for our listeners. Like you're throwing out a specific example here. Couple specific examples. I think so. We have this concept of GM prerogative, and you and I are in wide agreement about it. And if you look at the GM guides out there, I think there is wide agreement, certainly across the major games, the most popular games or more popular games, that this is about creating a story to be experienced together, and that the dice mechanic is there to serve a function. I mean, it goes back to the roots of this discussion and this podcast, which I think is it's the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing about tabletop role-playing games, that we rely on a specific dice mechanic to help us create a new world while interfacing with ours. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so cool. But then I think as the GM, it's like, well, great, but what do I do? With the GM, it's okay, so I've got prerogative, but I need to be careful not to railroad on one extreme, and I need to be careful not to flub it on the other extreme and just really not adhere to not honor the system. And so I think of two quick examples. Railroading. And I'm sure you'll remember this one, albeit not fondly. So a few years ago now, couple years. Yeah, I mean, pre-pandemic. I came into Milwaukee to hang out, to spend a weekend, with you guys, and you and our friend Brian and I played Star Wars. And I was so excited. I had done so much prep. And it was the first time I had GM'd since high school, maybe. Yeah. And I'd never actually GM'd. I maybe had GM'd once before. I don't know. Not much. And so I just prepped the heck out of this, but I mean, you guys even commented on the time. Brian was like, finally, he's like, so what you're saying is you really want us to take this turn. And it's like, I was totally railroading you guys because I had an adventure, and I just was so inexperienced. I didn't have enough knowledge. I didn't have enough experience, enough base to like take the left instead of the right with you guys. Right. That was an issue.
I remember that gaming session because that was, not to give stuff away about the gaming itself, but that was the one where we were both the smugglers on the station, and we had come across, I won't dive into the specifics of it, but almost like an underground droid movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it well. And I used that gaming session when I walked into it, knowing that this was new for all of us.
Right.
Two, you had wound a story. Brian probably said that. Brian, no, you'll remember it. I don't remember Brian saying that, but I just remember being, okay, I got immersed with the idea behind the story.
Right.
About where this was going. So I forgot in a small way that it was a game and not just a story that was being told. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, because as the GM then, I had put so much thought into the story and into the background that I had not adequately prepared the foreground. I knew the story, but I hadn't finished constructing the world enough that we could sandbox.
No, and I did the same exact thing with D&D. I spent hours, and it didn't feel like it. It just, once you, those of you who listen and lead games know this. If you really enjoy doing this, you could get down in and start writing, depending upon how deep your world building. I started from a blank slate because it was D&D world. I could use whatever background I wanted.
Yeah.
it turned out to be hours worth of writing, and it didn't even process to me as hours worth of writing.
And we haven't even gotten into half of it, I'm sure. Not even
No,
close.
we've probably completed, I would say, and luckily for me, probably just about 10% at most.
Yeah.
And so that gives me another 90% to actually hone my skills at DM. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
been able to wiggle our way through some gaming that I needed to have occurred. So a little bit of railroading, but do it in a way where I could actually figure out how to DM as we did it.
But your railroading, I will say, and this is important for this discussion, as Prerogative, it did not come across as railroading. I mean, obviously I knew which direction I was supposed to go, but you landed my PC in an environment where environmentally there was one possible path with some wiggle room to explore, right? And that was really well done. And that was a far cry from the first session that you GM'd.
Mm-hmm. Not to take a completely right turn, but when it comes to this Prerogative and even going beyond Prerogative, just DMing in general, something else that Jeff said resonated with me, and that was, and again, paraphrasing, he didn't say it this way. What I heard it as, instead of giving the characters a good choice and a bad choice, how do you watch how your build in two bad choices?
Yeah.
And see where it takes the game, prepare for both. But, if, and we don't have to get into specifics because we could come up with a million of them, but, in the context of our game, I haven't really put any of your character or any of our NPCs in a position where they had to make the decision between two bad choices.
Well, so let me keep. Okay, so go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and then I'll turn over. It was
in
my head. It was a little too black and white. Good choice, bad choice. Not two bad choices.
See, that's where those narrative dice help.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So as you know, and our listeners know, I have on occasion GM Star Wars for my two nephews, or two of my nephews. I've got another one. But he has yet to express, and he's very young. He has yet to express any interest in Star Wars. I think he's totally in the Marvel universe. But so my two nephews, my brother's kids, two of them. It's been quite some time. Okay. I've been a bad uncle. I just haven't had the time. And they haven't asked much. I honestly think they're falling kind of out of interest. I more recently played video games with them. And that's
gonna be a combo that I need to have a discussion with, because
they're much better.
Well, I figured that. I think the last game I remember you playing was, that wasn't a Civilization type of game, was an Ambrosia game on your old 68K Mac.
I can hear the scream from the game. That was such a I have a problem with video games, and so I've learned to just. And then you have kids. You have a family. You don't spend much time playing, do you? No. Even though we both love it, it's time away from everything else I want to do and I care about. But so I had promised. They've been inviting me over for a year. And I finally went over, and my brother hung out with us a bit too, but it was basically the boys and me. And it was probably, I'm going to say these things to Brad and all of our listeners, and then Brad simply will have to wait until we're off air to ask for follow-up. So we spent a couple hours playing all of the versions of Assassin's Creed, because I had played that before. Those are incredible, just incredible. And especially when they were so powered up, I was like invincible. And then what's the Star Wars? What's the simulator? It's incredible. You're on all the different fighters. I'm blocking on the name.
It isn't Battlefront, is it?
No. It's the dogfight one that recently came out and was upgraded.
Oh. Okay, I know what you're talking about, but
tells you how long you and I have been out of the loop. Man, I used to think I was good at flying in these games. You want to see me die quickly? Oh man. Okay, so we are good with that. Anyways, so I back to this other example. So you'd asked a question. So the last time I had GM'd for my nephews, it was the next step, the next little adventure in our ongoing campaign. And I have a sense, I actually have a fairly, you and I have to sit down sometime and I've got to show you all my notes. I've got all these notes and graphs of how all of these characters connect. There's this droid insurgency. Actually it's a droid religion. There's the Hutt Lord, there's the Black Sun, there's the loose Rebel Alliance affiliation, there are these gray Jedi, there might be someone who's not, but seems like a former Sith. It's all going on here, and they just get little bits and pieces. Okay, so the last time we played, they needed to fail. I had consulted with my two role-playing unpaid consultants, also known as my daughters. And they had said to me repeatedly, you've let our cousins become too powerful as PCs. Because I've given them too much gear, etc. We let them retcon their father's character. Remember their father's character from he like owned a Star Destroyer and had a planet that he just used back in the day when we were all in high school. So I let them retcon it so that they could connect with their dad's character and get all the money. Okay. So we're at a point where the dice mechanic, to use D&D and Pathfinder lingo, I needed a crazy CR kind of mentality in order to set limits on their characters. Because I don't want to be the uncle who does a TPK with his nephews. And every time I was concerned about that, they would handily wipe out whoever I sent against them. Handily. Like, and my girls finally said, okay, you're gonna have to kill them. And I'm like, well, I want to draw the line before that. So what I did was I went in with a plan. And it was a two-part plan. One part was they were going to have to face too many statted out NPCs who fit really beautifully into the story and who they had kind of encountered once before in the background. So notice the narrative would work. On the other half, there would be these off-screen NPCs who they knew were tracking them and who they could try to interact with and who might shoot at them. But I didn't care. No matter what, they would never be able to make contact with these shadow NPCs. It would simply provide a sense of anxiety in the session. And they were my backup in case these 4 NPCs in the foreground, in case I understated them, that was my backup. And if I recall, it's been months. If I recall, it ended with they were sure that the shadow NPCs were crucial. They weren't. They were 100% flavor. And they ended up tied up, not killed, with the others standing over them.
Just so we're clear, in case anyone comes in the middle, we're talking about a game.
Yes, not my nephews. Yes. They're PCs. That is important proviso. Thank you.
Yes.
But my point is, I took a ton of GM prerogative, but I really tried to stay true to the dice mechanic. I overstated characters, but then I let the rolls happen. If that makes sense.
But they still had fun, right?
They had a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to, and I made sure that if it was going to be a character, there was a moment when one of my nephews it looked certain their PC was dead. Like it looked certain it was over for that character. And he looked crushed in session. And I'm like, let's see what happens. And I wasn't going to let him die. I was going to use prerogative, that he was going to be severely humbled, but his PC wouldn't die. And so that's I think like you have, I've learned to use prerogative, but I think we both feel very strongly about honoring the mechanic, because otherwise, like my nephew's never, if anything goes, then anything goes. And why am I playing this game?
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. That's been too much. Your turn.
No. That's actually it. I think like you hit it is the narrative system, and I think I told you this, that I struggled with it at first.
Yeah.
Much more so than you did. But I came at it from purely a player view, and not world building. I think I would have had a different perspective if I had spent the time learning the mechanic from a world building perspective. Excuse me. The idea of, in your game there's advantage and disadvantage, right?
Right, because that's the mechanic.
That's the mechanic. Even in you could argue, even in the D20 world, there's ways to do that based off of. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I've got to stop us so that we don't get hate mail.
Yeah.
Okay. So right, and then actually, advantage disadvantage is what we call it. Advantage disadvantage is what it's called in D&D.
Yep.
And Pat, right, that's a D20. FFG has whatever terms everyone forgets. Threat, advantage and threat, right? It's not great. Yeah, but so just to be clear, so we don't get hate mail, right? We're talking about two different things, but we're using the same lingo.
Yeah, and my apologies that, but you hit it on you kind of helped me in a way go toward my point, and that is even in a air quote binary system, it really isn't. You can use that advantage disadvantage.
Yeah,
you can point. Like Jeff had indicated, give the players two bad choices or two good choices.
Because can't you, as the GM, you're better at this with D&D than I am, and with Pathfinder, can't you as the GM use prerogative to offer advantage or disadvantage roles based on environmental factors?
Well, in this case, I've had to do that on occasion, in the context.
No, but right. but seriously, isn't that legit?
Yeah. As far as I know, yes. And this is one of those things that I think is kind of that's an area where if you went and did like a nerdy research project on how that has iterated over time between the versions and the forks in the versioning. You see that because the narrative didn't push D&D. I think D&D obviously existed before. It pushed this idea, and the folks that made Star Wars, the narrative system at FFG, now was it Edge, right? Edge Studios, is that what they are?
Edge Studio? Yeah.
Edge Studio. I can't speak, it would be lovely to have them on at some point to talk about it, but just from an outsider's perspective looking in, it was a way of taking something that was a little bit on the prerogative side and putting it into the dice mechanic. And D&D didn't react to it. I think in some ways, the Star Wars game was in effect a reaction to that and a next iteration. It'll be interesting to see over, we're in our 40s now, so we'll probably see a couple more versions of D&D.
One hopes.
Hopefully.
Yes.
But it'll be interesting to see if there are any mechanic changes over time.
Are we going there?
To see any, and I'm hand gesturing the merging of lines. Are we going to be asymptote, or are we going to actually kind of see a merging of that type of mechanic into the D&D world or not? But we're way off topic.
I've always found you asymptotic, but I don't have an answer for your question. Okay. So before we head over to the GM corner, then let me put you on the spot here. So as a GM of one or all games, up to you. As a GM, how would you articulate, Brad, where you draw the line for GM prerogative?
I think that's multicolored. One, I think and I think we've talked about this, if it becomes, I wouldn't want to do it to, and people do this, I know I've seen it in video games. You can't do that to assert authority as a DM at the expense of the fun of the player characters. Right. In other words, you're not there to beat on the player characters. You're there to facilitate.
Yeah.
So you can't, if I am heck bent on beating you to a pulp, to really hurt your character or kill off your character, that's really not what you're there for. I mean, if you make bad decisions, like, or in your case, if you were, in a situation you weren't going to let your nephew's character die.
Right.
But you were drawing in effect the story, and it had to go this route.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go into the game, with the old handlebar mustache and say, I'm going to get them. That if you use GM or DM prerogative for that, no. I think that DM prerogative, I've learned this over time, I don't think it should be used as a crutch for lack of knowledge. And I've done that, and that has forced me, when I have gamed in my head out episodes of our campaign, if I think they might go a different route, rather than DM prerogative them back the way I go, why not prep for that? And why not learn something I didn't learn? So I think I overstated what you said before, is don't break the mechanic.
No, I think that clarifies it. Yeah.
Don't break the mechanic, and don't go into the game wanting to make your every time. I mean, at some point in an adventure, you may have to, have someone open up a can of whoop blank, and that may have to happen. But if you go in as a DM to every game wanting to hurt people and, crush them and have them do,
you probably shouldn't be a GM.
Yeah. There's, right. there's, we can, Jason probably more than I, we could.
There are programs for that.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
So, I think those are the two areas, and those are broad.
Yeah.
I think I've never met someone who is a DM who was in it for the power trip. And I would question, I would be interested to meet someone, not to play with them, but to meet someone who felt the need to do that. For me as a DM, when I play with you all, I don't look like I'm lording over you. I feel like I am the undercurrent,
right? That
will guide or help facilitate or provide or kind of throw stuff up. But in effect, you're the leaders, and I'm just helping facilitate. I don't see this as people like, DM isn't God mode in a video game.
Right. Yeah. And yet I do think that it's okay for the GM to be the puppet master, so long as every puppet has autonomy. And what I mean by that, maybe that's a little harsh. What I mean, I think it depends on what, each of us and our personalities and our ways of going about this business. But I think like the GM, like as the GM, it's my world and you all get to play in it. So like when you GM, my feeling is, you are the puppet master, right? In the sense of, probably not a great analogy for anyone from the 80s, but this is your world. You've created it. You get to be the sole adjudicator of roles, but never would I feel like my options are in any way limited, right? It's like he's a friendly, benevolent God, right? And I think one can go to that extreme, or truly being the facilitator. Like I'm just pushing back a little bit. I don't look at it as I'm just there to do what they want to do, but I actually don't think that's what you're saying either.
No, and that's why I couldn't word it. For the record, folks, we're recording during the day for the first time in a long time.
We made the mistake of saying, hey, let's record on a Sunday morning. It'll be good for the schedule. And it is, but we're not doing this again.
No, it was worth a test.
We both overslept. Yeah.
So I don't think they're getting lack of quality. I think our quality is up to the normal subpar standards. So
that's why we have two listeners.
Exactly. No. I think you hit it on that. Benevolent God. Yeah, maybe it's just my own perception of it, and it's the same exact thing. Is I've built the world for you to live in, and there are rules.
Mm-hmm.
There are some rules in the context, but ultimately, and this goes, you could have a whole faith discussion on it, and I'm not interested in going there right now because we're going to wrap up. But, um, you know, what is free will versus what is been preordained or destined? And that's a discussion you have to have. For me, I have mapped out. I look at it from the perspective of I've tried my best to map out so that you absolutely have free will to make your decisions.
Yes.
And then I have to be prepared to account for those as much as possible. Or as I finish my piece, I have material like Jeff's book to account for the fact material. that if you take a turn and that I wasn't prepared to handle, that I don't necessarily break rules and all that to account for.
Beautiful.
I have material in front of me that can account for that quickly.
Yeah. Well said, sir.
So plug and a legitimate plug for the book again. It having that at my desk makes it easier for me to have, again, it's not a bookshelf long tome. It gives me enough material to account for changes.
That's right.
Or things that don't occur, and I can quickly react to.
Yeah, these three lovely books, again, one more time, by Jeff Ashworth. The Game Master Book of Random Encounters, it released in September. The Game Master Book of Non-Player Characters, it released this month in October. And then coming in May, which you can pre-order, the Game Master Book of Traps, Puzzles, and Dungeons.
Yeah.
Okay. Highly recommended it. Okay,
I'll be interested in that one only, and then
you are.
Push.
Yeah,
I'm interested because Jeff talks a lot about puzzles. In the discussion we had, the interview we had with him, so that's going to be a fascinating book because he said multiple times he likes a good puzzle.
Yeah, that I agree. That is the book of the three that least interests me, and yet, based on what you just said, I was surprised with the first book. I wasn't surprised with the second book because I knew what we were getting. I would not be surprised if I am surprised by the third book. I will probably almost undoubtedly order it because I know the caliber. But I suspect that like you and I have been talking about, should we just do a dungeon crawl? Yeah. Right. And if that were the case, that's literally the book I think we would probably want to go to.
Oh, he gives one shoots in there, one-offs, so 8 one-shot adventures in the first book alone.
Oh, I was talking about the Traps, Puzzles, Dungeon book, but right, even in the Encounters book, it's already, like, I think I had texted you at early on. There was an environment, there was a temple, an ancient temple or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I could work that. In fact, that might, I shouldn't say this to you, that might help inform the Star Wars game.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, we got to walk over to the GM corner and wrap
up. What's been on your desk or in
there? Okay, so when I'm gonna, how about this for my bit? I'm not gonna. I don't have a thing. There's a whole bunch of news that's been coming out in the past, just since our last episode.
You mentioned Edge Studio at the top.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I'm not going to get into any of these. I just am going to note these for our listeners.
Yeah.
As of this recording, which is about 3 weeks before this episode will drop, about 3 weeks before this episode will drop, Edge Studio finally posted a meaningful update to Facebook and their other threads. And it is very encouraging. And it's encouraging because they announced a list of the FFG, now Edge Studio, Star Wars books that are going to be reprinted and published next year in 2022. And it is a very comprehensive list. It's not everything, but it is all of the core rule books and several of the supplementary source books, which are all excellent, and basically all of the most popular what do you call them? Source books for their 3 variants of right, the Jedi, the Rebellion, and the Empire, or the Edge of the Empire stuff. Okay, that's one thing. As of this episode being out, Star Trek Lower Decks wrapped season 2. As we record, we just saw the penultimate episode. The last one comes out next week. They're excellent. They're really firing on all cylinders. When this drops, this episode, I think we are going to be 3 days away from the series premiere of Star Trek Prodigy. That's a big deal. And as this episode drops, we are just a few weeks past New York Comic-Con. Hold on, I just dropped my pocket protector. They shared for wide distribution the full trailer to season 4, which you had sent me right after in fact, I think before I even saw it, because I was teaching all day yesterday, you sent me it. There's a full season trailer for season 4, and I think both of us said to each other, okay, this one finally looks like it could be first-rate Star Trek.
This looks, and I will say it just as a caveat, because I actually watched the trailer in slow-mo because I saw something.
I've been reading the reviews.
And I actually took a screenshot of a Ferengi in a Federation uniform. I screen captured, because you and I have talked multiple times. What are the Ferengi doing in the 30s?
Like I responded to you, like, because that had already made the threads, right?
Yeah.
Like I follow trekcore.com and trekmovie.com because they're really good sources of Trek related information, and of course Star Trek.com, but canon, if you will. But yes, I saw that. I'm like, ooh, and then my response to you was along the lines of especially given that you've got the Ferengi captain in Starfleet, Nog would be proud, and you've got the Federation president of the 32nd century, who is of Cardassian, wait for it, Bajoran, and human descent. And it's like, guys, this is Trek, and this stuff allows us some heads up for our port to FFG. Okay, so that's mine. I want to
come back to this. I want to come back to that because that's a great discussion for a future episode. For me,
yes,
I talked about this before in more of a humorous context, but I watched the movie Free Guy yesterday, and it's a great movie. It uses a lot of current pop culture memes. It talks a lot about or it uses it's a lot of discussion about player character versus non-player character, and I want to be very cautious because I don't want to give dead giveaways, including to you.
Like they all die in the end.
Yeah,
right. Good. Thanks.
Well, the whole the discussion here is this push-pull between PC and NPC. There's this undercurrent
interesting
of PC versus NPC, and someone made a point, and I've
never considered you very PC, but go on.
Oh, well, of course not. And so being able to go 21 episodes and not get in trouble for something I've said is actually probably a record.
This is the nicest we have ever been to each other.
Yeah, because this is if you figure 20 episodes, a little over an hour piece, let's just be a little liberal and say 40 hours worth of audio. I
think it's good that you're finally becoming a little liberal, but go on.
Yeah, it's I can't believe you put that on the audio. Okay. I guess we're going to bring up politics in a future episode.
Kidding.
But no, point is, it was a humorous in context, but it was something I don't think anyone ever thought of, and that is this character is in the game, this Ryan Reynolds character, and in the context of the larger discussion, one of the gamers, Twitchers, they used actual people who I don't know, but are very popular in the Twitch world as cameos. They said, well, over 1.9 billion NPCs are killed every year. And it kind of just flowed through, and I'm kind of like, wow. If you really think about it in the context of and you haven't played this, and it's actually it's a very, very Grand Theft Auto Online. I've played a lot of it thanks to my son showing me how to do it, because there is a It is a way to exert violence in a way that's almost disturbing to me. Plus, I can
Just keep going. Just keep going.
Plus, I can fly a DeLorean, and
Yes.
But point is that there's this whole discussion about player character versus non-player character with sentience of them, and it has good cameos, and I get nothing for it, but it is, if you go into it thinking it's going to be a humorous version of Ready Player One, you're going to have fun with it.
Neat.
If you go into it without any Ready Player One exposure and watch it and are open to this, and you are a little bit understanding that there's going to be some memes and some pop culture in there that is newer than what you're used to, you'll have fun. I think it's a good movie for anyone who's probably listen to this that's into gaming.
Awesome.
But as we wrap up, think of it this way: if you go watch the movie in the context of what we just talked about in terms of DM Prerogative.
Hey, and where is it streaming? How do we get it?
You can it goes up for rent on Apple TV on the 12th.
Okay.
I can't remember if it's the 12th of October or the 12th of November. I'll have to go back and look.
Oh, and is it just Apple TV?
I purchased it on Apple TV because I knew that my son would watch it.
Yeah, right.
I would watch it, and it's perfect for me as a background movie. I'll put it on again probably this week.
Yeah, that's what you said.
It's really a rich, and Ryan Reynolds did say, I'll leave it at this, that he has not prepped for a part like this as much since
I saw that
prep for Deadpool.
Yep.
So
okay, very good. Well, good recommendation. Maybe we'll have to follow up with that. All right, everyone. Thanks as always for listening. It's good to, so to speak, see you again. As always, be well, stay well. Much more to talk about in the coming weeks, including pending interviews. Bye-bye.